Hi, everyone. Thank you all for joining today's webinar on the application of AI and ML to enhance real-world data for precision medicine use cases. My name is Sue Huang. I'm the head of data strategy at Datavance, and I'll be your moderator for today's webinar. Today, we have guests from Prognos Health joining us. Jason Bhan, MD, is co-founder and chief medical information officer at Prognos, a leading clinically focused data and analytics platform. Jason is a national expert in the application of technology to healthcare and medicine. Adam Petranovich is the chief data scientist at Prognos, where he and his team are focused on developing cutting-edge algorithms that turn real-world data into clinical insights. Our webinar today will cover the current state of data in the healthcare industry, as well as technology applications to make this data useful. We will open to Q&A at the end, but you can submit questions throughout the presentation by using the Q&A icon at the bottom right of your Zoom window. First, I'll turn it over to Jason, who will start with an overview of Prognos.
All right, so we're going to go over what is Prognos, and then Adam's going to go deep into some fun AI, what it's good for, what it's not good for, what we've used it for, and then we'll end up with some Q&A at the end, folks. So thanks, Adam. You can go ahead and click us through. So Prognos is a healthcare technology and data platform company. We were really born out of creating products based on lab data, clinical lab data. And our systems are designed to ingest that data, harmonize that data, and then productize that data. Over the last couple of years, we've evolved as the needs of our clients have evolved, and we're looking for more sources and more types of data to include in those products. And so now we're really focused on our platform providing and delivering access to high quality, analytics-ready data, as well as the end products that we develop to deliver to those clients. Just to give you an idea of what we're dealing with, we sit on, actually, I think updated is probably closer to 150 billion individual records on about 350 million plus de-identified patients, and thousands of clinical algorithms that are designed to move that data from its native state into a useful one. You can go to the next. And our current platform applications, really around the data curation and integration piece, we have a marketplace. And on that marketplace, our clients can sift and sort through dozens of integrated data sets, creating subsets of that data that meet their needs for whatever project or analysis or study that they want to do. And in our payer side, it's really around predicting risk in populations, and the applications that we learned there are also put back into our other products. And then our life science solutions really include the ability to design very specific cohorts, which I'll talk about a little bit later. Our patient journey applications, which allow for web speed, complex analytics on longitudinal patient data to look at various events, market shares, persistence and compliance lines of therapy. And then our alerts, which is sort of our marquee product that's been around for the longest, which is really designed to help brands identify, find doctors who have the right patients that fit your brand profile early on in the process so that you can intervene and help educate and get those doctors to prescribe the appropriate medication for patients. So that's just a quick overview. I'll go ahead and turn it over to Adam to dive into the cool AI stuff.
So thanks, Jason. First, I want to start with a little preamble. One, I'm like on day 3 of a brutal cold, and it's not COVID. Can confirm other diseases out there that is not COVID. So if I need to drink water, start blowing my nose, keel over dead, sorry. And the second is a little bit of my background. I started out in econometrics. This is now, Zena, I got a dog here too. Maybe 15 years ago, doing modeling for mortgages, financial modeling, all things math and econ. Loved it. Worried a lot about causality. Then I joined the world of ad tech. So if you ever wondered, like, why do ads show up that I just clicked on, I was the guy that did the math. Did that for quite some time. Then started my own NLP company. That failed miserably. as many NLP startups do. I now been at Prognos for about 4 years and some change. I also do VC consulting, basically for due diligence stuff. So I meet other founders and AI companies essentially to say, hey, is your tech real? Is it not real? What's the deal? And how I like to start these conversations first is level setting. You know, generally when I talk to folks, people say, hey, why hasn't AI cured cancer? Where is my AI ML doctor? I thought I was going to be able to now just put my symptoms in. WebMD just keeps telling me that I have stage 4 renal disease. That's not true. I just have the cold. And then why hasn't deep learning like found new indicators, especially in rare disease? And like, folks, at times I agree. We as a kind of industry are better positioned than we have ever been. The increased availability of data, right? Data is now everywhere. Everything's digitized. They're shoving it to the cloud. It's there. The commoditization of compute and storage, like it is so cheap to get access and to spin up a large cluster now. It is so easy to store terabytes of data. And honestly, like the frameworks we use for that type of analysis are becoming easier and easier to use, which is a bit of a mixed bag. Like, you know, I've been doing this for a while. And so, you know, I want all of my data scientists to know what's going on under the hood. But in reality, it's just easy now. It's so much easier to do to data science at scale. Although, you know, there are exciting things to talk about here. Like, for instance, in nature of in April, you know, hey, a German biotech company was able to announce phase 1 clinical trials of a new anti-cancer molecule. This was identified using AI/ML techniques. Now, AI/ML didn't create the molecule; it just helped solidify and help prioritize which molecules they fall on. But you know what? There's exciting things here. But first, let's keep fighting this hype curve. Let's bring this back to reality. And what are some challenges we have that have kept us away from essentially realizing the automated doctors and AI's curing all disease? One, and this is probably the biggest one, it relates to 5, is legislation, data rights, and access. I can't do everything I want to do because of legislation. And that's for good reasons. I'm not arguing against it. But being able to have PHI, HIPAA data in sufficient quantity with rights and sufficient sources is very hard to do. Thus, the world of DID is born, right? Datavance is obviously a huge player in this. We at one point had a DID technology, but it has limitations. One, right, these are essentially fuzzy tokens that are derivatives of first name, last name, and a bunch of other different identifiers. I think we have 6 or 7 different tokens that we use, and we actually change which tokenization we want to use depending on use case. If we want it to be more specific or more loose, you know, and we have a collision rate of around 1% between assets. It has affected some of our applications. Like, we'll see a patient with like 2 million test results in a year. Either that person has no blood left in their body, or there's been collisions. You know, Mark Smith in California, born in 1970, probably has, you know, tons of results. So also, this isn't ad tech, you know, and in my previous world of ad tech, you know, we dealt with data at a crippling scale. We would generate 4 terabytes of data every day, you know, billions and trillions of records. You know, think about like 9 or 10 different log files being generated for every time someone is on the internet and clicks a new web page on a mobile device. And it was machine generated code. So it was like relatively clean. And if there was an error, it was usually systematic, meaning like, hey, you know, dates are off by a day for this entire block of data. You know, in the world of medical technology, you know, you see that each individual data point could have something uniquely wrong with it, which is a challenge. The second thing that's really that really kind of holds us back a little bit is first the curse of dimensionality. right? And we should spend some time talking on this. So when you embed data for machine learning, you have a lot of decisions to make. And now that we have so many different sources, RX data, claims data, EMR data, image data. I mean, we're getting to the point that you may even have like transcripts. You have to represent that as a vector. And depending on how you encode it, and especially when you pivot it by time, temporal and longitudinal stuff is super important for medical studies, as things. So, and I'll get to one of our algorithms later. We'll have 20,000 features for a patient by 1,000 time steps. And that's one patient. And for every feature that you add, you need a set of training examples for the kind of deep learning algorithms to figure out the relevant features and to do its work. There was some rule of thumb, which is I disagree with, is like, oh, you need 5 patients or 5 samples for every one feature you add. In reality, it's probably more, and it also depends on the level of confidence that you want to achieve. But us saying, oh, I've got so much more data, is it more patients so you can use them as training observations, and are they labeled? Or is it just my matrix is getting wider and wider and wider? And I think at the end of this, there's some open questions. We should talk about that a little bit. So also improper expectations I'm seeing within the industry. Poor decision making on what problems to take and to tackle with AI ML. We'll get into that. Lack of understanding in AI expectations, especially at like the senior executive level. In the coming from tech and the tech industry, where you see, leaders of organizations get tech and understand it, and then you come work in healthcare, you see that a lot of the leaders don't quite understand it yet. They're getting there. But because of that, you see kind of poor decision making in terms of what to invest in, how to invest in, and also the expectations they have. Not enough data scientists. Believe it or not, we have 40 something data scientists on my team. We service 50 different disease states primarily. That's not enough, right? There isn't enough people doing this type of research within the industry to actually see things pushing forward. And also the pace of the industry. And this kind of goes back to number one, like to iterate here and experiment thing, the sales cycles are long. And so these are the things that are really kind of slowing things back. And so first I want to kind of talk about what are the strengths of AI. And this is if you had to walk away with one thing, what AI is good at, walk away with this. AI is great at simplifying, automating simple tasks. This is, things that a normal human could do, but could do one at a time, and it would take them, a year to get through. AI can learn and do in seconds. That is its true strength before we see the general AI kind of releasing its decades away. And these are things like email filters and classifications. Being able to read something and say, I can do a simple thing with this, and doing it at scale. AI is not good at, here's a bunch of data, figure it out and tell me what's important. It will tell you correlations, but there's so many gotchas within that question. I've seen a lot of success, obviously, within the AI ML space of text processing, especially once the word to vec and then doc to vec and how we understand how to do vectorized embeddings of not only individual text, but of words and sentences, and kind of started to get rid of the vanishing gradient type of stuff. It's great. And these are tagging. So, hey, tell me what's important from the sentence, sentiment analysis, entity recognition, document discovery. Those are like definitely solved, right? Image processing, and this is mainly because of transfer learning. within the world of image processing, you don't necessarily need millions of cat pictures to start identifying cats. What you can do is have a pre-trained network and then kind of break the last several layers. Even I think convolutional network is generally what most people use, but break the last couple layers and then turn it to a specific task. Image processing is great. And these are things like entity recognition, classifications, tracking of objects in images, also transformations. So all of us in our TikTok filters, or I don't have TikTok, Snapchat filters or whatever, they're able to like recognize an image and manipulate it and do these type of transformations of that image. Really good at. Quality control, this is huge. We see AI ML within this, obviously bank fraud detection. I would argue a couple more false positives and false negatives. There's been several times my card has been shut off and I've been like, hey, it's me, I promise. But I guess, I would be rather a false positive than a false negative. And then market manipulations, the SEC and a lot of companies, and I have friends that do this, is specialize in, hey, when is someone unplaying fair? When are they manipulating the market? And then also pattern recognition, huge. Pattern recognition and optimization is I would say where a lot of the really interesting stuff is happening within the AI space. These are things like ad targeting. Once again, former thing I used to do. Lead prioritization. Hey, what things should I focus on? And then financial modeling, right? All of that type of stuff. But let's start talking about real world discovery, real world data within healthcare and kind of folks in that space. So where currently does AI ML shine? First is in data prep, enrichment, and standardization. We're going to dive deep into this a little bit later about applications that we found merit, but especially in lab data, it is a mess. We partner with many different labs, many different national reference labs. You'd be shocked to see some of the things that we still catch. And so units of measure, understanding that when I see a test, what is the actual units that should be used. Now, once again, this is a thing that a human could do, but a human can't do it when we're talking about billions of records, right? Someone's eyes would bleed. And so, hey, let's create a computer system that can do that for us. Another one is like LOINC tagging. Often we won't get the right LOINC, and these are essentially ontological mapping stuff. If you're able to have, and I think within our data set, we have 150 to 170 columns that we receive from a particular lab about a particular patient and all their, medical information. Often we don't know what test there is, or there isn't a LOINC code yet. And so we have to kind of look across the fields and try to predict it. ICD, CPT, and NDC described this, once again, goes back to ontological mapping. And then I think the most important thing is interpretation of free text fields, especially in anatomical pathology, molecular diagnostics. Sorry, the DAQUIL is strong. We'll get to that a little bit later. We'll go into some of the details on how we use that. Anomaly detection, we use all the time for data entry errors. We often see like an A1C score of 1,000, right? And those are no brainers, right? But being able to detect those and flag them is important. And another thing that what's interesting about some of these anomaly detections that we see, often context matters, right? And being able to look at a particular patient's data set, and specifically within lab, and then be able to link them cross data set through the power of, obviously Datavance and some of this stuff, and say, hey, they're on a particular drug that will push this in a certain direction is super important. Also, data set and feature prioritization. I think this is where we use AI/ML to not necessarily make the final decisions, to help with prioritization. What data set should I go after? And it's often we'll ingest a data set and then throw it through our models and measure lift, or we'll say, hey, I need to get rid of some of my features. Can you help try to rank features? Now, ranking features in very high dimensional space is hard, but you'll see a use for that. And so, and then finally, like expanding cohorts for clinical or commercial use. So we often, and I'll get into this later, get the question, hey, Adam, we have a new drug that we want to launch with, or hey, Adam, we're looking for new factors. Here's what the clinical definition is. Can math expand upon that? Either find more patients or predict early. The answer is yes, but it's often a high risk, to a moderate reward scenario. We have on occasion found interesting relationships through AI ML techniques. However, it struggles with rare diseases. If you have, and once again, like let's say 1,000 patients every year that are diagnosed with this, it's not going to be great for AI ML. But then you look at oncology events, and we had like 1.6 million people with cancer diagnosed last year. That is starting to be in the data realm. This goes back to the curse of dimensionality. So look, if you want to get involved in AI ML, I thought it'd be worth talking a little bit about what do I need to do to get my organization involved in this. First is, and really three things is that I want you guys to think about. One is setting clear expectations. First and foremost, both with internal stakeholders and external clients. Understanding that when you take on a new AI project, it is a risk. It is not given that it will work. And we'll get into a little bit later about when we take on consulting engagements, how do we walk through clients with it. Two, choosing the right applications with your risk tolerance. Knowing how to evaluate and to place bets and when to cut bait and when to kind of double down. And then finally, prioritizing the hierarchy of needs. And let's kind of pull these apart really quick. So first, setting clear expectations. And when we start and engage with a pharma brand, they often say, and either commercial or RWD, we've done both, or RWE, saying, hey, here are the clinical definitions of what's important to detect this disease. Let's find some more. Let's use math. And the first question, that we generally ask is, what does success look like to you? And that is to understand that if a client says immediately, oh, that AI in 3 months is going to solve this for us, unlikely. Not impossible, but unlikely, and be able to kind of set that type. And second one is, first is the data sufficiency question. And this is when it's really important to stress, hey, just adding more columns, is it the same as adding more rows? So saying, hey, I've got these 50 patients, but I've got every possible data point on them. Great. But that's going to require a lot of manual feature engineering, a lot of data science to say, all right, I'm going to start one by one going through these features and deciding what I can and can't use, even before I get to some sort of neural network approach or some sort of like fully automated AI discovery. And even then, you're only getting correlations. Rarely do you start getting into causality. And then also, what are your timelines and milestones? When we have consulting engagements, we often time box things. We generally say, hey, first, here's a 2 to 6 month block of EDA, when we're literally just like exploring the data, trying to discover some things, getting everything prepped, getting organized. Then we have what I call the initial thread model, which is like, what is the simplest thing we can do to show value? And then after each one of these gates, we kind of engage with the client, hey, do you want to go further and push this further? We can add complexity through either model complexity or data complexity. Or, look, it's past our risk tolerance. Let's cut bait and maybe we'll invest in it again next year. So back to that risk tolerance thing. So spinning up a new AI ML project is about placing bait. And this is not going to be necessarily helpful, but it is hard to predict how risky something is. It is uncertain. Often executive sponsors will say, hey, what are the probability for success? And we'll generally give initial pontifications over it, but we won't know till we start doing it. It can change at any time. You can have breakthroughs at any times. And so the things that we recommend to balance this risk, one is establishing clear metrics of success. This doesn't necessarily have to be an F1 score or some sort of MSE or whatnot. Often, you'll have to, your metrics of success will change over time. You should generally ask, particular project, your data science, what the guidance are. One is always start simple and then build in complexity. So later on in this presentation, I'll take you through our underwriting model. Our underwriting or risk utilization model, the first model was if it has a match, meaning here's a patient prognos, how much are they going to cost next year? And it was like a binary variable that we just said, is there some separation between the general population if it's a 0 and a 1? And there was. I'm like, okay, cool, there's something here, right? And so the rush to a super complex approach, especially if you're a new organization in this, is a bad decision. Another one is document. I have this thing that I tell my team, if it's not written down, it didn't happen. And that's because often, even if you don't achieve your initial goal, you'll learn something from this. And so making sure that you are transparent, and I guess even leading to the next one, but making sure that there's something written down of the work that is interesting that other people can go back to is super important about deleveraging risk for a project. But really being transparent with your work and making sure key executives, which some of you may be in the room, it's not a black box too. And that doesn't mean you have to, you have to go down and understand how gradients are transferred through multi-layer networks or through an RNN. You don't necessarily need to know that, but forcing your data science team to kind of explain their thought process and why. And then, accepting some things on faith, but being able to follow along is so important into kind of understanding where a project is and where it's going. So first, I want to, not first, and finally, I want to talk about the data science hierarchy of needs, of how you should focus on kind of setting yourself up for success before we get into some of the models that we use. So first, this is credit to Monica Rogati from Hacker Noon. This was out in 2017. It's still relevant. This is something that we try to beat into the heads of new companies that are trying to do AI or things, that when you see a model results, it is the tip of an iceberg of work that set that up for success. And you will be able to iterate so much faster if the base of your pyramid is rock solid, rather than having a data scientist who's supposed to be doing the top part, spending most of their day doing data prep. And in order, we have first collect data. And these are things like, hey, do I have data sufficiency? Do I have the right types of data? And am I able to link it to other data sets? Is it actually usable? It's always a disappointment when you take on a data set and you find out it's not usable. It's like, son of a, right? And so being able to collect the data and make it usable is probably the most important thing. You can't do any of it without that. Second of it, and is always the bane of data science, is reliable data flow and infrastructure. So being able to being able to query the data, manipulate it, even subsample versions, you don't need the whole thing, to prototype things, to understand things is so crucial. So and really you can think of this as, can I interact with the data? Then you obviously you need to make sure the data is worth its salt. I don't know if that makes sense, but you need to make sure it's good. Many a time I have had an algorithm and then realize that like the data is wrong and just be demoralizing, right? So you want to make sure there isn't any systematic bias within your data. Obviously there is a tolerance for some errors, but the cleaner and more organized you can make your data, the better it can actually impact your business. And then I'm going to kind of skim a little bit over the top parts. Obviously, the analytics and metric segments being able, and this is almost like feature engineering, you can think about, having your data in a way there's some pre-processed versions of it, that there is some data that's already set up for organization people can use. They don't have to necessarily go to your system and then relabel anything. Worth spending time on. And then finally, these are the things that now people say, oh, data science. A/B testing and experimentation of ML algorithms, and also the AI deep learning parse. That comes at the end. And what's interesting is to this day, when I take on a new data scientist or especially a young data scientist straight out of grad school, after 6 months, they usually say, why aren't I modeling more? I spend all this time feature engineering and prepping my data set. In reality, when we're trying to do AI and ML, 80% of our time is spent setting up the data, feature engineering, testing infrastructure before we even get to the hurrah of I'm going to run some LSTM over this data and have some results to show. And this goes back to communicating, and you should add weight to this when you're planning on a project. When you have data scientists come to you and say, hey, and this is a common response, nothing to show yet. That's not true, right? Usually what happened is I spent the last 4 weeks ensuring that the data was actually valid, error checking before I can do the model. And there's like this natural tension where he says, just model already. You need to kind of spend time doing this. But we'll get into that a little bit when we start diving into some of the AI applications that we use at Prognos. But first, I want to hand over to Jason to talk a little bit more about Prognos and how we view our data asset.
Thanks, Adam. So, I mean, this presentation is really primarily about AI and Adam taking us through that. But we wanted to make sure we do cover that bottom chunk of the pyramid, which is 80% of the work, and where a lot of the challenges lie, even before you get to the bigger ones. So over the past few years, the data ecosystem has gotten much more complex. There's more data coming online, more types of data, more sources of individual types of data. There's more data structures that you have to deal with. There's more clinical and unstructured data that hasn't been available prior. And there are a lot more rules governing the use of that data. Basically, what's happening is, in order to have a project succeed, your project, your product, your study, or whatever, you have to navigate a lot of different pieces of a puzzle. You can go ahead and change the slide, Adam. So choosing that base data set or your cohort to analyze or do your study on, or build your product off of, that's hard. There are a lot of variables. And when you add in clinical data, it gives you an exponential increase in the variables that you have to deal with. For example, it's one thing to deal with whether or not a claim was submitted for a particular lab test. Was I tested for hemoglobin A1C or was I not? That's great to know. But once you actually add the result into that, you have thousands of potential ways that result is delivered to you. You have hundreds of different ways that test can be resulted, and accounting for all of those variations can be really complex and impact the population that you want to look at. So for example, one of the things that we've seen out in the industry is when a client takes on a project, really it's figuring out what you want to do. That's sort of that left orange box or yellow box. And then there's this massive chunk of time that's really all about figuring out what data you want to purchase, looking at the data as it's overlapped, and then figuring out whether or not the number's big enough. And then that's even before you run into like starting to do AI modeling, et cetera. So, the problem that we wanted to hack initially was that data acquisition and cohort design phase. From the unknowns of purchasing multiple data sets that need to be linked and then figuring out whether the numbers of overlapping individuals with the right characteristics is viable for your study. We wanted to shortcut all of that and bring it to the beginning and do it in a really fast process. You can change the slide. So really what we've done is we've cut this sort of months-long process into minutes and deliver it at web speeds. So we're not going to go into that piece of what Prognos does, but you're welcome to check out our website. There's some videos on it. You can reach out to us directly for demos or a starter account on our systems. But that's really just a summary of how we tried to solve that 80% workload problem to prep it and make it easy and fast to get into the good, fun AI stuff. So I'll turn it back to Adam and get back into the cool things.
Roaring bitmaps, Jason. Come on, that's the secret.
It is cool.
So we have a bunch of applications. Now we're going to get a little bit more technical that we use here at Prognos. I tried to pick 3 that I thought you folks would find interesting. One, NLP. I want to actually show you our tech stack and also our algorithms. RWD for clinical data enrichment. I want to talk about Xena. Go. Sorry, my dog's name is Xena. Welcome to working from home. Going through that and being able to show how we enrich our data, some of the challenges that we've prioritized and struggle with. And then also, and this is kind of a cool, actually predicting patient cost and patient utilization. I decided this is, I think for AI ML purposes, this is more interesting than some of the commercialization efforts that use AI ML. This is a little bit more complex. But first, NLP for clinical data. And I want to first acknowledge other smart minds that work on this. Ola is my VP of data science. He leads research effort and also the NLP enrichment team. So a lot of this is his work, but he is gracious enough to let me talk about it in front of all of you today. And so when we started our NLP efforts, everything we built is in-house. We used and leveraged external frameworks, but we trained our own models. And we kind of made the decision saying, hey, we want to solve NLP with matrix algebra and calculus, not with lookup tables. And so what we initially did was literally scrape the internet for medical journals, for medical, and this was like PubMed, Mayo Clinic, Wikipedia. We even have built this crawler that went from medical article to start creating a embedding space that is related to the medical ontology and to start understanding medical words. Not necessarily for any given task, but to be able to see when we see a medical word, do I have a relative embedding that shows context well? And you can think of this much like Word2Vec. I don't know if you're familiar to Word2Vec, the generalized vector embedding of text. But each word essentially has, I think we're at 150 numerical columns that represents its feature space in higher dimensions that we can use it and provide and perform mathematical operations on it. So with that, we're able to add second layers of models on trained to particular tests. Shout out to great performance. Our F1 score is above 90% with most applications. Within the lab date, we always benchmark our stuff against Amazon's Medical Comprehend and still undefeated. And so it's an exciting project for us. And it's to the point of now it can just take arbitrary any type of text and do cool things with it. So some of the things that it does, I'm going to walk you through in order. First, it text cleans, essentially says, hey, is there any obvious spelling errors? Let me remove uppercase, lowercase, drop all the stuff. Let me make sure it's ready to be processed. Then we usually do domain detection. We found that context matters. And so, we break out molecular diagnostic and anatomical pathology or metadata into different subsets and decide what model to send it to. We then find concepts and tags, right? And you can think of, when I'll get into this a little bit later, but like our algorithm actually reads Latin. So it will see a thumbing, and if it hasn't seen this word before, doesn't understand it, it will break it apart and be like, oh my gosh, by sounding it out or looking at the Latin or the breakdowns of the word, I know what it is right now. It's interesting because, you'll have pathologists and doctors that have been working for quite some time that use a lexicon that isn't current, like a doctor that's, late in his career that still uses words that were really big in the 70s and 80s. versus a doctor that is now current. And it's like, how am I supposed to make sense of these and put them both in a common language? What we do is we often convert text to, the most frequent use of that or whatnot. We map them to clinical codes. This is an easy thing. It's not necessarily exciting, but if you know breast cancer, you can map it to other ontologies like SNOMED or ICD systems. And then the really cool part is that we can also start to infer what the diagnosis was. If you've ever read anatomical pathology reports, what you'll see is it's not always clear what the hell the pathologist just said, right? You'll be like, I don't know. Do I have cancer or not? This algorithm is really good at figuring it out. And so finally, a tech stack. I know this is why you guys really joined. You wanted to see the tech stack. The types of frameworks we use. First, in the ML world, we like PyTorch. TensorFlow, it was hot and heavy for a while, but we found limitations, and we were a contributor for a while. And we eventually just moved to PyTorch. It's just friendlier. It's easier to work with. It's better documented. I think that the hype cycle for TensorFlow is dying. We use that primarily. There are also some things that we use sklearn for, the little engine that could, as I call it. And then Starspace, Facebook Starspace is great for creating those embeddings. Primarily our tech stack is Scala and Python. Look, Python is the API to data science. It's what you're going to primarily need to do to interface with all these frameworks. But you can see here, and we like to name some of our technology things fun. So when you see clinical unstructured text, it comes in, and initially it's passed to an algorithm called SIA, where it does categorization. What am I looking at, and what types of document is it? Is it a anatomical pathology? Is it clinical diagnostics? Is it whatever? Is it metadata? Once it finds that, it passes it to a core model that has context within that domain space. That core model, there's multiple of them depending on the domain space that has been trained. And what's interesting is that, like, after you had those embeddings, we were able to those embeddings of text, and these are what I talked about earlier. Essentially the word to vec for labs. We were able to then train models to do particular tasks. And this is when you start seeing, the core model, it transfers it into that domain. Then you have a tag predictor. Those devices are all things that we have rolled out for, and these are things like breaking words apart, smushing words together, looking at the word and words around it to start basically doing tag prediction. Hey, tell me what ontological maps are involved in this and pull them out. And what's so useful about that is, like, when you're searching for medical records and say, give me all the people with breast cancer, you can just say breast cancer, and it will be able to say, hey, even if it never says breast cancer within the document itself, that document will have, like, did a left frontal biopsy for positive, right? Like, no, you don't need to know the word breast, just because it doesn't say breast cancer doesn't mean we can't find it. Once it does that, it does kind of a higher level concept tagging and clinical interpretation. So you'll be able to say, is it positive or not? We then output this either as a JSON through our API, soon to be public, or we kind of amend it to our clinical table so you can look it up in our database. But it's honestly, it's one of the coolest things that we've done. So the other enrichments, how are we doing on time? I got some time. So the other enrichments that we're doing, first is provider enrichment. For our business, some of our commercial applications it's really important to know who owns or who ordered the task, who is the referring provider and whatnot. Labs and even EMR and med claims, it's not abundantly obvious who ordered the test and who's the physician. And so we've had to start embracing link projecting essentially. And this is LPA, random projections. And essentially you can imagine, like, seeing Dr. Tom in Iowa and saying, all right, I got a rec from him, but who's the referring provider? oh, when I, did this essentially like almost a Markov chain, you can think of it, of 80% of the time, he recommends his oncology patients, given this context, to Dr. Suzanne and whoever. We're gonna, with X degree of confidence, say that this came from him or came from her. But AI is great at this. So filling out your records, making sure you have stuff in there is great. And you have to do it at scale. So you really can't have humans do this. Test value outlier detection. We do this often. The Framingham study, which is where we get a lot of our reference ranges, is not perfect. When you have data at the scale that we have, we've had to kind of come up with our own thresholds for saying this record is actually bad or wrong. What's cool about this is that, and I said this earlier, sometimes it looks wrong, but it's actually not. And that's just because the drug regimen that they're on. So being able to link and say, hey, Stacy in New York has an A1C score that can't be possible. And then you go and check the drugs that she's on, like, oh, actually, this makes sense. We're gonna let this pass. It's super important, especially before you run these through AI ML algorithms. You want to make sure that, hey, this is actually accurate or not. However, this is now maybe getting into the weeds. When you pass these through AI ML algorithms, it's good to add that context information. So letting the algorithm know, hey, this is an outlier. However, this person is also on this drug. And that allows it to figure out the relationship, or hopefully figure out the relationship to infer, a bunch of stuff. And then test tagging at scale. So being able to link and join things together and figure that is important. And then finally, the last thing I want to talk about is AI for patient utilization. This is kind of our exciting tech stack that is for, saying, hey, when we get a patient, how much do we think they're going to cost next year? This was a large supervised learning problem. We were able to ingest, I think, 3 million patients and how much they cost over a multi-year period. And with that, we were able to, we tried several different algorithms. We used both manually and machine learned feature representations. These are things like, first we started with RNNs and within the LSTM, obviously. And then when that started having troubles with vanishing gradients because of long lookbacks, we migrated to attention networks. Google came out with all you need attention. That has a huge impact on this. We're able to generate predictions both at the individual and the group level. When you look at our tech stack, let me go really quick here just because of time. You essentially see all this data comes in. It is DID'd through Datavance into the DID world. There we harmonize, clean, and organize the data with all the algorithms kind of you saw above. We kind of pre-calculate them in vector space. We do that for a myriad of reasons, but mainly we want this thing to run fast. Then we have a Lambda architecture, so it's serverless. And then once we receive a request from a payer saying, hey, this set of patients, how much do you think they're going to cost? It's able to look them up and execute the last couple layers in the network. But none of this would be possible, honestly, without good partners and folks able to link the data in a meaningful way. And from that, let me hand it over to Sue.
Great, thanks, Adam. We're really proud to partner with Prognos and be the enabling technology for the Prognos platform. I'll give a quick overview of what Datavance software does. So Datavance Vision is to connect the world's health data to improve patient care. Like Jason alluded to earlier, what we're seeing is that data is more fragmented than it has ever been in the healthcare industry, and the pace of generating new data from EMR data to novel diagnostics to wearables to omics data is only accelerating. So there's a lot of interesting data out there, and there's more analytical power than at any point in the past, but the data remains hard to find and siloed across many different organizations. And Datavance core focus is really solving that healthcare data fragmentation problem in a HIPAA compliant way by being a neutral technology partner that is focused on de-identification and data linking, and not data aggregation and data analysis, which is the core that Prognos is focused on. So today, Datavance ecosystem contains hundreds of different partners across multiple different data types, and they're all using Datavance to de-identify patient level data in the same way so that common keys or tokens can be created that allows the data, even if it sits in different organizations, to be linked together in a common way. So how does the software work? Datavance platform can enable either cloud-based or on-premise de-identification of data. The de-identification technology essentially utilizes a patient's identifying data elements, whatever that data originator may have, be it social security number, name, gender, date of birth, address. These are all fields that can be input into our software to create HIPAA compliant patient keys. These keys are then used to match health data about the same patient across multiple organizations. And one unique thing about our approach is that our software applies a unique encryption key for each organization so that my records aren't matchable across organizations until those organizations decide to partner together, at which point they will inform Datavance to establish a link. After a link is established, then my records at the organization on the left, where I'm represented as patient 123, will be matchable to the records at the organization on the right, where I'm represented as patient 456. So this is a key security feature of the Datavance network. Prognos' platform utilizes a Datavance token for de-identification and linkage, which makes the data that you can obtain from Prognos interoperable with the hundreds of other sources of data that work within the ecosystem. So with that, thank you for your attention, and we will open it up to audience Q&A. You can type in your question by using the Q&A box on the bottom right of your Zoom window. So we already have a couple questions in, and the first question is, how do Google Healthcare API, Amazon Comprehend, and your products compare in terms of capabilities and accuracy?
Great question. We constantly benchmark them just to know, like, hey, we're often making the build or buy decision. I'm a little bit biased, so I say try them and see for yourself. But within the context of lab data, our solution generally outperforms Medical Comprehend. The challenges is like certain conditions, it can be close. Also with EMR, we haven't really benchmarked about EMR. It's a chance we could, but when you're looking at specifically lab data and actually RX and claims now, we have a superior product. And it's mainly because it's been our focus. But I encourage you to benchmark them yourselves. Jason, any thoughts?
No, I think you covered that well.
Second question. Thanks for that, Adam. So second question is, how do tokens work when you link clinical data? For instance, how do you ensure the data remains anonymized? I can jump in here. So Datavance tokens are created from identifying elements about the patient itself. So things like name, gender, address, email, phone number, social security number. We can tokenize a number of different fields depending on what that data originator has. Once the tokens are created, they are irreversible back to the underlying PII elements. In addition, Datavance software can be configured to expect a specific data layout of clinical data that may be attached to that patient's token. And what we go through is a process working with a certifier. Either the end customer wanting to use Datavant will have their own certifier, or Datavant also has a certification process built in to its platform, where we will look at the clinical data elements attached to the token and ensure that it meets the statistical thresholds for having very little re-identification risk. So in that way, we're meeting HIPAA compliant standards for privacy of healthcare data.
Yep, that's good. I would probably add in there that helps us handle each source. Once you start bringing multiple sources together, you do run a risk. You can continue to collect more and more de-identified data, and eventually it becomes identifiable. So those same statisticians and experts in de-identification help us maintain the risk of re-identification to like below a certain government approved percentage. And so some elements do have to be shifted or removed or adjusted based on the different types of data you start to bring together.
Thanks for adding that context, Jason. So another question, where do you think the application of AI and ML will go in healthcare, and what are some of the limitations?
So a couple thoughts here. We've seen it's within healthcare, it's been great with detecting cancer through image recognition. That's not necessarily too surprising, and that's almost a solved problem now. Also, within drug discovery and prioritization of what drugs and molecules to go after, it's having traction. I don't know if it's necessarily solved like we see in the images. I think what I think in the next probably 2 to 5 years, we'll see test recommendation. So essentially you'll say, hey, we've got your blood work back. We don't know what you have, but people that are like you, that are close to you, most likely you should probably offer or recommend these other tests, and like either recommend it to the doctor or to the lab itself. I think is interesting for in the world of healthcare. But like the challenges remain, right? We have this dimensionality, so you need the scale, and then you need enough companies to understand, look, it's not going to be perfect. It's going to take some whiles to get there. But I think test recommendation to me is what I'm kind of keeping my eyes on. What do you folks think?
Yeah, I think recommendation, that's a really good one. Any kind of recommendation is good. I think one of the biggest challenges in healthcare industry in general is that providers are particularly protective of their patients and their processes and their knowledge, and trust is always an issue, right? So I always considered, being able to recommend things as opposed to taking over the care of a patient of a given provider is sort of the way to go. So that's probably the nearest term stuff that we see. Certainly in the areas of like triage, where decisions can be made quickly and guide people into higher levels of care. There's already applications there. I think expanding on that is a great idea and concept. And again, back to just looking at the foundational ways that AI is really useful now. And looking to see sort of expanding on that. But yeah, I see the biggest issue in the medical and the provider community is like, don't take over. Just tell me what I could be thinking of. Tell me what I might be missing, et cetera. So there's a lot of opportunity around there. It's pretty cool.
Jason, you doctors don't trust my machines yet.
No, we do not.
All right, well, I think that is all the time we have left. We will get back to other individuals who ask questions offline. So thank you everyone for joining today's webinar, and thanks to our guests, Adam and Jason from Prognos, for explaining the hard work you do in building a data platform and folding in AI and ML techniques to make that data useful for insights. This recording will be made available on our website, so you can access it there. Thank you to all, and have a great day.